system of rules, which is basically a social contract between the state and the citizens. We were ruled by invaders for over 1,000 years, and later, prior to the national movement, the country was ruled by sovereign princely states and with their own geographical boundaries. When the British decided to give India freedom, a constituent assembly was created through elections, and around 300 or so members from all walks of life. And these members sat for more than 200 sessions, debating every clause, the issues of emerging nation with divergent languages, cultures, and religions. The national leaders at that time wanted an inclusive nation, keeping all these factors in mind, and Dr. Ambedkar was made the drafting committee chairman. Here, Ambedkar proposed the federal structure with the states having its own powers and federal government also having defense, finance, railways, posts, and telegraphs, etc., etc. Over a period of time, the constitution was amended for more than 100 times. Now, when we speak about the pandemic times, the government of India has brought in the Disaster Management Act. And as we all know, the country was put in lockdown under a short period of 4 hours, putting the country totally out of gear. Here I know that Professor Narendra Kumar, with his vast experience as a political scientist, will throw light on the federalism proposed by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in the Constitution. Professor Narendra Kumar teaches at Center for Political Studies, School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. His early schooling was from various villages and later from the city of Panipat in Haryana. His bachelor's degree was from Kurukshetra University, Kurukshetra. He earned his Master's of Arts, Master's of Philosophy, and doctorate from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He has vast work experience, teaching and research experience as assistant professor and professor at central universities, including University of Delhi, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi, Baba Saheb Ambedkar University, Lucknow, and Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He has many publishings, and among them, published 7 books, edited and authored with well-known political scientists, of especially well-known political scientists of France, Christophe Jaffrelot and Sukhdeo Thorat and others, and singular. Recent publications: Politics and Religion in India, 2019, Dr. Ambedkar and Democracy, 2018. 10 research papers in national and international journals, 5 papers in and edited books, 5 book reviews, 9 articles in newspapers and magazines, presentations and special lectures, 22 presentations in national and international conferences, 7 special lectures, academic administrative, has vast academic administrative experience. Is the director, Center for the Study of Social Exclusion and Inclusive Policy, Babasaheb Bhimrao Ambedkar, Central University, Lucknow. Head Coordinator, Department of Political Science, Babasaheb Bhimrao Ambedkar University, Lucknow. Member, Fox Fellowship Selection Committee, Academic Council, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Apex Body of Research, Ministry of Social Scientist and Empowerment, Government of India. Academic referee for Oxford University Press, Routledge, Sage, and Nature Springer. He has many fellowship awarded, University Grants Commission, Junior Fellowship Research Fellowship, 1995, Indo-French Social Scientist Fellowship, 2011. Organization of workshops, conferences, and training programs, refresher course, orientation course, and national international conferences. We really look forward to Professor Narendra Kumar's lecture, and I am sure this session is going to be lively and enlightening. Now, I would like to read the preamble of the Constitution of India. We, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, and to secure to all its citizens justice, social, economic, and political, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship, equality of status and of opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual and the unity and integrity of the nation. In our Constituent Assembly, this 26th day of November 1949, do hereby adopt and enact and give to ourselves this Constitution. Now, I would like to hand over to Professor Akthod Srinivasulu to kindly moderate the session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, James. Thank you. అందరికీ సాయంకాల నమస్కారాలు. తెలంగాణ జనవేదిక జూమ్ ఆన్లైన్ మీటింగ్ కు ఇచ్చేసినటువంటి ప్రొఫెసర్ నరేంద్ర కుమార్ గారికి మరియు వేదిక సభ్యులు మిత్రులందరికీ సాయంకాల నమస్కారాలు తెలియజేస్తూ, ఇవాళ కూడా ఒక మంచి టాపిక్ ను మనం ఎన్నుకోవడం జరిగింది. కోవిడ్ మహమ్మారి సంక్షేమంలో డాక్టర్ బిఆర్ అంబేద్కర్ ప్రతిపాదించిన సమైక్యవాదం నుండి నేర్చుకోవాల్సిన పాఠాలు అనేటువంటి అంశం గురించి మనం ఇవాళ చర్చించుకుంటున్నాం. ఎందుకంటే ప్రధానంగా కోవిడ్ అనేటువంటి దేశంలో ప్రవేశించి సుమారుగా 15 నెలల సమయం పాటు, అంటే పోయిన గత సంవత్సరం మార్చిలో ప్రవేశించినటువంటి కోవిడ్ భారతదేశంలో దానికి సంబంధించినటువంటి విషయాలపైన చర్చించుకుంటూనే భారత రాజ్యాంగం బిఆర్ అంబేద్కర్ గారు రాసినటువంటి భారత రాజ్యాంగంలోనే చాలా స్పష్టంగా కేంద్ర రాష్ట్ర సంబంధాలకు సంబంధించినటువంటి చాలా విషయాలు వివరంగా అంబేద్కర్ గారు రాజ్యాంగంలో చెప్పడం అనేటువంటి జరిగింది. ఇక్కడ గమనించవలసింది ఏంటంటే భారత రాజ్యాంగానికి భారత రాజ్యాంగము లోపల భారతదేశ ఫెడరలిజానికి అమెరికన్ ఫెడరలిజానికి తేడా అనేటువంటిది చాలా స్పష్టంగా ఉంది అనేటువంటి విషయాన్ని కూడా మనం దీన్ని బట్టి అర్థం చేసుకోవచ్చు. అయితే చాలా స్పష్టంగా చెప్పవలసింది ఏంటంటే మన దేశంలో ఉండేటువంటి ఫెడరలిజం ఏదైతే ఉందో ఇది కేంద్రీకృత సమైక్యత అంటే సెంట్రలైజ్డ్ ఫెడరలిజం గానే ఇండియన్ ఫెడరలిజాన్ని గుర్తించడానికి అవకాశం ఉంటుంది. అయితే యుద్ధం చేసేటప్పుడు కానీ యుద్ధం చేసే వారికి యుద్ధ పరికరాలను ఇవ్వాల్సినటువంటి బాధ్యత కేంద్ర ప్రభుత్వానికి. అంటే ఇప్పుడు ఈ కోవిడ్ సమయంలో ఇది దేశం మొత్తం కూడా ఈ కోవిడ్ అనేటువంటిది పెద్ద ఎత్తున రావడం, లక్షలాది మంది చనిపోవడం అనేటువంటి జరుగుతున్నటువంటి ఈ సమయం లోపల అంటే కేంద్ర ప్రభుత్వం అనేటువంటిది రాష్ట్ర ప్రభుత్వాలకు ఆర్థిక పరమైనటువంటి విషయాల్లో కానీ, వైద్యపరంగా కానీ, లేదా ఇతర విషయాల్లో కానీ అనేకమైనటువంటి సదుపాయాలను సమకూర్చవలసినటువంటి బాధ్యత ఇవాళ కేంద్ర ప్రభుత్వం మీద ఉంది అనేటువంటిది చాలా స్పష్టంగా చెప్పవచ్చు మనం. కానీ ఇక్కడ రాజ్యాంగం గొప్పదా రాజకీయం గొప్పదా అనేటువంటి విషయానికి వస్తే ఇక్కడ రాజ్యాంగాన్నే గొప్పగా మనం పరిగణించవలసినటువంటి అవసరం ఉంటుంది. కాబట్టి అంటే ఇవాళ భారత రాజ్యాంగంలో ఏదైతే చెప్పబడినటువంటి విషయాలు ఏవైతే ఉన్నాయో వాటిని మనం తీసుకున్నట్లయితే అంబేద్కర్ గారు చాలా స్పష్టంగా చెప్పారు. కాబట్టి వాళ్ళ భారత రాజ్యాంగాన్ని గౌరవిస్తూ ఈ కోవిడ్ సమయం లోపల మనం నేర్చుకోవాల్సినటువంటి పాఠాలు ఏంటి, ఈ యొక్క రాష్ట్రం సమాఖ్య అనేటువంటిది ఉందా, సమాఖ్యవాదం అనేటువంటిది ఉందా ఈ దేశంలో, లేదా సెంట్రలైజ్డ్ కేంద్రమే ఏక కేంద్ర ప్రభుత్వంగానే ఇది కొనసాగుతుందా అనేటువంటి విషయం మీద ప్రొఫెసర్ నరేంద్ర కుమార్ గారు వారు సెంటర్ ఫర్ పొలిటికల్ స్టడీస్, స్కూల్ ఆఫ్ సోషల్ సైన్సెస్, జవహర్లాల్ నెహ్రూ యూనివర్సిటీ న్యూఢిల్లీలో వారు పనిచేస్తున్నారు. వారు అనేకమైనటువంటి ఇంతకుముందే జేమ్స్ అనేకమైనటువంటి వారి గురించి విషయాలు చెప్పడం అనేటువంటి జరిగింది. వారి యొక్క బయోడేటాను చదవడం జరిగింది. వారిని మాట్లాడవలసిందిగా ప్రొఫెసర్ నరేంద్ర కుమార్ గారిని వారిని ఆహ్వానిస్తున్నాను. సార్, ప్రొఫెసర్ నరేంద్ర కుమార్ గారు, ప్లీజ్ సార్.
గుడ్ ఈవినింగ్ సార్. గుడ్ ఈవినింగ్ ప్రొఫెసర్ గారు. Professor Narendra.
Yeah, good evening.
Yeah, good evening. Yeah. I welcome you and I thank you for honoring us this evening. And I also my special thanks to Professor Sanjeev Reddy for introducing you to this August forum. Thank you. Please continue, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Ramarao, T. Ramarao, we call you with love Ramuji only. So I was calling Sanjeev ji that what's actually your full name. So, then I got to know that your full name is this. So thank you so much for inviting me here, and thank you very much, Professor Srinivaslu and Mr. James Prasant. And thank you very much, Jan Vedika organizers, the organizing committee, for inviting me here on this occasion. This is the lecture that I thought that would be appropriate to deliver at this juncture, because Dr. Ambedkar's contribution to India and to various issues actually have not been taken into consideration properly. That's why I thought it would be better that we put the name topic for today, learning lessons from Dr. Ambedkar's federalism in pandemic times. To contextualize the topic, I thought that we should be first looking at that how to contextualize the concern beginning from the end of the topic, that is pandemic times. See, pandemic times, we know that pandemic times are emergency times. These are very, very extraordinary times. And actually, when we look at the extraordinary times in the Constitution's perspective, then extraordinary times have been considered in terms of emergencies. And we know that there are 3 different kinds of emergencies which can be imposed during the extraordinary times. But actually, when we look at the pandemic, this pandemic, in fact, is not only extraordinary, actually it is extraordinarily rare times. Because what I feel is that the Constituent Assembly or our founding fathers, they might not have been able to see that there could be something like extraordinarily rare times as well. Though they talked about different kinds of emergency wherein there was a constitutional remedy for that. But herein that how the Constitution would be responding during those times, let's say extraordinarily rare times, probably there it could not be thought of that clearly. But what we can, when we go through this lecture, then probably we will be trying to understand that how they would have responded to such a times. Then when we look at the federalism in fact is somewhere where there is a division of power between the center and the states. And this federalism has different kinds of features, and primarily the features are defined by, let's say, one is that there has to be a judiciary which would be looking at the disputes between the center and the states. Then obviously it has to be through the Constitution. So these are the basic features of the federalism, but there are various others, but these are the which we can say the fundamental features. Then there are different kinds of federalism all over the world. Even when we were adopting our Constitution, that time also there were different kinds of federalism, because there was US American federalism, there was Canadian federalism, then we had Australian federalism, and some more. But these all different kinds of federalism have their own specificities. And when we look at the Indian federalism, then we find that it has been adopted differently, and it has taken into consideration all these kinds of federalism which were existing during those times. Now, when we look at Ambedkar actually, Ambedkar, you know, that has usually been confined to the chief architect of the Indian Constitution, and then just the leader of the Dalits. But when we look at his contribution, his contributions have been very, very significant. And in fact, he responded to every issue of importance that came before him during his lifetime. Whether it was, let's say, on representation in 1928 before the Simon Commission, where he talked about various kinds of options available for the representation of the Indian people in the assembly, or in the central assembly as well as state assemblies. Then when he was talking about this 1928 before the Simon Commission, interestingly, he was the first one who talked about the universal adult franchise. None of the leaders of those times came forward to say that the Indian people need to have universal adult franchise. They were thinking only to enlarge the franchise, but actually this was the man who was talking about the universal adult franchise long back in 1928, which was adopted obviously in 1950 by our constitution. And many of the, even the Western countries did not have the universal adult franchise even in 1950, leave aside the 1928. Then when came the issue of partition of India, then he wrote the book called Pakistan or the Partition of India. Then when the constitution making came into being, then before coming to the Constituent Assembly, actually, he had given a mini kind of constitution about states, and which was named as States and Minorities. It was a kind of mini constitution on the framing and functioning of the Constitution of Independent India. Then 1951, on women, he was the probably first one that who talked very, very exhaustively regarding the women rights. And he was very much well aware that in the Constitution of India, we could not bring in the issue of women very, very clearly. So he gave this bill, this is known as Hindu Code Bill, which subsequently was not passed and he had to resign. But it has been passed in piecemeal by Nehru itself during 1955 and 56. Then on the reorganization of states in 1955. See, before we went for the reorganization of states in 1956, he was the one who talked about the reorganization of states. And then when we are looking at today's topic on federalism, actually, he responded to the Government of India Act of 1935. He found that this was the act, that is 1935 Act, which was talking about the federal structure and the kind of federal structure that will be coming up for India in a very, very particular manner. But he was very critical of that kind of federal structure, which was actually envisaged by the 1935 Act. And here, the lecture he gave in was in Pune's Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics. And the title of that lecture was Federation versus Freedom. So Federation versus Freedom, herein he basically is talking about that how we need to look at the federation when we are aspiring for the freedom. And when he's talking about the freedom of the country, then herein he is also talking about the freedom of the people as such. Now, when we look at the Constituent Assembly and let me talk a little about 1939 lecture. Actually, here what happened is the Government of India Act 1935 proposed that the provinces will be having more powers than the British India. And British India was a larger and little bigger entity as compared with the provinces. Though you know that there were more than 600 provinces and those provinces were finally brought in the Indian Union by the efforts of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel and many others. So during those times, actually, what Government of India proposed, that Act 1935 proposed that the provinces will have major powers so far as federation is concerned. And he was, in fact, Ambedkar was very critical of that. And why he was critical of that? Because the kind of circumstances we were in 1930s, those were very different kinds of circumstances. Because we were not India. We were not a nation as such that time. We were the nation in making. And when we were nation in making, then the provincial actually attachments of the people, provincial boundings of the people were very, very strong. And you know very well that there had gone a lot of effort wherein we were thinking about how to make India into a country. And that's why in 1940, when he's talking about, he was talking about a very, very centralized kind of center, where the center would be in a position to have its say on the units as such, on the states as such. But when we look at his understanding, let's talk about actually first the Constituent Assembly understanding about the federalism. When we look at the Constituent Assembly, then actually in the Constituent Assembly also there were different kinds of views. And the framers of the Indian Constitution were fully aware of the India's unique and peculiar problems that had not confronted other federations in the history. And therefore, they actually wanted the policy of pick and choose to see what suits them best and what suits the genius of the nation best. However, there were two options before the Constituent Assembly. First was to adopt a unitary system of British type, which India had been experiencing for a considerable period of time. Second was to choose the federal system. But finally, you know that we went for the federal system. The proceedings of the Constituent Assembly actually were marked by absence of any forceful defense of provincial autonomy during the drafting of the federal provisions. However, some of the members of the Constituent Assembly were staunch supporters of provincial autonomy. And their speeches in the assembly are like complaint against providing excessive powers to the center. But when we look at actually Ambedkar, then Ambedkar realized this, that we as a nation need to have a different kind of understanding about the provisions. And that's why I would say that in Ambedkar's view, Indian Constitution could be federal or unitary, but in the normal times, it could work as a federal constitution, and in the times of war or crisis as a unitary one. No other constitution possesses this flexibility. This has been done so on account of situations peculiar to India. First, the British India was administered on the unitary basis. A comfortable, complete break with the past was not possible. So the movement was from Unitarian to Union, that is federalism, with a strong center. Strongly, the message that has come down through the history is that whenever the center has been weak, the country soon disintegrated. And hence, there was a necessity for a strong center. Thirdly, ours is an underdeveloped country. So a mighty effort at development was called for, which could not be possible without mobilizing all national resources under the central guidance and also the leadership. And finally, in all the modern federations, the accent is on the center. Therefore, learning from their experiences, the founding fathers wisely opted for a strong center. But actually, when we look at the center and the state, though there has been a kind of strong center, but that strong center is also marked by the federal system. Though the constitution does not talk about, it has not specifically mentioned about the federal or federalism. The words are not used in the constitution. But the provisions which are available in the constitution, those tell us that how the constitution will be functioning as a federation. And we know very well there are 4 kinds of lists which are available. One is state list, union list, and concurrent list, and there are residual powers. And majority of the powers are obviously with the center, but the states have also got some of the powers to make laws in different areas. And obviously there is the concurrent list, wherein both the state and the center can make laws. And there has been going on various kinds of debates over a period, let's say in the last 70 years or so, that how this concurrent list subjects should be dealt with. Because the constitution says very clearly that if there is a dispute between the center and the state law, then the central law will prevail. And when we look at the pandemic, in fact, then basically the issue of health is with the state list. And though we know that the center has also its own mechanism for addressing the health issues. Then when we look at the constitution as such and the contribution of Ambedkar, so far as federal structure is concerned, then I think what we can do is we can look at the water policy that Ambedkar did talk about in the during those times, because the water policy is something which actually relates with both the center and the states. Actually, what happened is in the 1935 Act, because it did clearly mention that the provinces will have more say so far as major issues are concerned. But over a period of time, the resources of the nation actually were to be distributed among different states, and wherein the center had to play a significant role. Regarding this, actually, Ambedkar conceived new instrument of executive authority for water management, that was a River Valley Authority. In pursuance of this objective in 1948, Damodar Valley Corporation Act and Electricity Supply Act were enacted by the Constituent Assembly of India. For the first time, we notice that essential linkages among economic planning, ecological and water resources development, and socio-economic upliftment were established. Thoroughly mindful about the development of the human face, Ambedkar, under the new regime of water law, struck a balance between prosperity and poverty by ensuring that the benefits of irrigation project reaches to the grassroots level. Because these grassroots are available where? These are basically in the states. Before he laid down office as cabinet minister in June 1946, he had given concrete shape to the crucial policy for resettlement, rehabilitation, and compensation for displaced cultivators and non-cultivator households. See, we know that we have been struggling for a long time that how do we make the Indian people realize that despite the developmental processes, they are also given the relief. And herein, Dr. Ambedkar was very clear that what kind of relief and how if the people are displaced, then they have to be given proper and complete compensation. And actually, framed on April 22, 1946, the resettlement policy got approved by Labor Department in the third interprovincial conference. The policy subsequently formed the basis for provincial governments in developing interstate multi-purpose river valley projects. That means that Ambedkar, though he might have been concerned about the strong central government, but one needs to look at that he was very, very clear that how the people have to be compensated, and there has to be some kind of interrelationship between different provinces, and this has to be actually done by the center has to play a role as a kind of manager, but actually things will be done at the local level. When we look at Ambedkar's contribution so far as provinces is concerned, actually once he said that a province needs electricity and wishes to utilize its water resource for the purpose, but it cannot do so because the point at which water can be damped lies in another province with no interest in it or money to finance the project, and would not allow the needy to use the site. Complain as much as like, a province can take such an unfriendly attitude and justify it in the name of provincial autonomy. So actually he was very much concerned that a province cannot consider or cannot aspire for provincial autonomy in the name of greedy of its own people, greed for its own region, and that's why there has to be some kind of mechanism wherein there will be interstate linkages for this. And finally, when we look at the in the second meeting of the policy committee on the electric power policy in 1945, Ambedkar actually enjoined upon the provinces to come to cooperate federalistic terms, and he said that little or no objection should be raised to central control where a province does not desire to take on such control, or where the interest of regional development extending beyond the boundaries of a province, the central intervention might be considered necessary. It means that if the provincial government is having some issues, and if there are resources which are going beyond the boundaries of the state then or the province, then there has to be some kind of central intervention. Now, when we look at the constitutional provision, we know that very well that the constitutionally India is an unusually centralized federation. The center has vast powers, not only over finances, but also over administration. India's states, most bigger than other large countries, have surprisingly few powers. And in such circumstances, when we were facing the pandemic, then what we find is that during the first wave, we were actually quote unaware regarding the first wave of the pandemic. Why? Because from government to the administration and from people to the politician, actually they were not ready for this kind of pandemic. And in fact, it was world over that the regimes were not prepared for this kind of pandemic. And you see that it's not only in India, but elsewhere also. In fact, there has been a lot of hiccups while handling with the pandemic. Actually, if you look at the initial phase of pandemic, then we find that from scientific to non-scientific response we find so far as pandemic was concerned. And you know very well that even the leaders in this country gave some kind of non-scientific response, that you need to go for a clapping, you need to go for so many other things which were which were unusual so far as scientific understanding was concerned. And we find that in the last 70 years or so, though the constitution is talking about developing a scientific temperament, but the leaders in the country were themselves were talking about some of the very, very unscientific issues, or the unscientific response to the issue of pandemic. Then with the passage of time, what we find is that there was a completely centralized concerns about handling the pandemic. And that's why we see that there was a complete lockdown in the first phase. And this complete lockdown started just 4 hours before. And the country actually went for a complete lockdown. And we know that there has been a lot of issues during those times, that the initial stage of COVID-19 response highlighted the unitary tilt in the Indian federal structure. The central government implemented a national lockdown by using its powers under the disaster management law, and its Ministry of Home Affairs issued extensive guidelines to states for controlling the pandemic. The law empowered the central government to commandeer state and local authorities if necessary. State governments' acquisition, even though they had independent powers under a more specific law, that is Epidemic Diseases Act 1897. When we look at this national disaster management issue, then what we find is that there are various kinds of salient features of this national disaster management provision. The provisions are like for prevention, for mitigation, for response, and for the recovery. But herein, what we find is that the response during the initial times was very, very confusing, and the states themselves surrender power before the center. And if you remember that in the initial few months, actually the states did not oppose anything that the center was coming up with. And thus what we find is that the central government persisted through the central administration of the lockdown, and resulted in significant chaos, confusion, and contradictions. In fact, state governments desired that the central government continue with its administration of the national lockdown during its initial phase, and it resulted in states losing considerable decision-making powers with the central government. However, in the later phase of the lockdown, we have seen that the state's autonomy was restored with less functional powers. Since the national lockdown required shutting down almost every activity of economic activity, in fact, there was a severe reduction in the revenue of the state governments, and it brought more vulnerability to the states due to already continuing fiscal deficit with the states. And if you recall that the Finance Ministry's reforms of May 2020 also impinged upon the autonomy of the states governments, and have only been accepted due to unprecedented situation presented by the pandemic. One of such measures has been the conditional increase in the borrowing limit of the states. See, originally our constitution gave actually borrowing limit to the state governments. Let's say it was 3%, and during this time it was increased to 5% of the gross state domestic product. Then not only this, actually there were different other kinds of reforms which were introduced. One of the reforms during that time was introduced was the agricultural sector reforms. And agriculture, you know very well that agriculture is a state subject. And states tend to oppose even a small kind of reforms if suggested by the central government in the normal times. But the recent reforms completely dismantle the long-standing agricultural marketing system, which has monopolized trade in agriculture within states and prevented the growth of more efficient agriculture marketing system. Ordinances were passed by the central government side by, and the steps were taken to dispower the states in this regard. Instead, actually, the central government has appointed to other constitutional and entries to justify its own powers to legislate on the subject of agriculture. Then next, we see that land reforms have been introduced in 2020, and these land reforms have also been detrimental to the issue of, let's say, federal structure. The reforms allow industry flexibility in hiring and retrenchment. They will make industrial strikes more difficult by clamping new conditions and also expand the social security net for both formal and informal workers. Under the Industrial Relation Code, the government has actually allowed companies with up to 300 workers to fire workers or shut plants without the prior approval of the government. That's why prior approval was not required, is not required now. Firms with more than 300 workers need to still apply for approval. However, if the authorities don't respond to their request, the retrenchment proposal will be deemed to be approved. So you can understand that the kind of labor laws which have been introduced during these pandemic times, these are very, very detrimental to the labor sector as such. But when we look at Ambedkar's contribution to the labor sector, then when he was a member of the Executive Council of the Viceroy's Executive Council, he was a Minister for Labor, then in fact, he was the one who initiated various kinds of labor reforms in this country. And if you see that before that time, there used to be 12-hour service for the labor class. But Ambedkar was the one who introduced 8 hours job for the labor, that you will be hiring the person only for 8 hours in 24 hours. So you cannot ask for more. And if you want to ask for more, then you will have to compensate for that. And there have been various kinds of reforms which were introduced by Ambedkar, let's say for the women labor force, and also different, actually, there are vast reforms which have been introduced by Ambedkar during those times. And regarding industry, even he has talked about the informal sector also, wherein how the government should be intervening. Then GST has been one of the issues which has been a controversial issue when we talk about the center-state relations and the federal structure. The GST reforms actually is the most recent instance of such reworking of the center-state roles for the greater and collective good. It involved a consensus-building approach to implement the reforms. But over a period of time, what has happened is that the GST, actually the way it has been implemented and the way the things have happened during these times, then the country's response to the pandemic has shown that the carving out roles through consensus can address new challenges to the federal governance. Why? Because actually for the consensus building for sectors like health, rural development, and agriculture, though former minister who was a finance minister, Arun Jaitley, he wanted that the GST should be implemented in such a way that there is a consensus building for these three sectors in particular, which are very, very crucial for the states, that is health, rural development, and agriculture. What should be an appropriate forum for this purpose? The experience of the GST Council actually could have been very, very useful. The ongoing friction between the center and the states over GST reforms tells us that the consensus building is not something which can be done at one time, but it is a continuous process and it has to allow sustained dialogue and deliberation. But during the pandemic, we know that there has not been such a dialogue between the center and the states. And actually, if you look at Ambedkar's role, then he would have been really unhappy that when there is a GST council where both the center and the state have to interact and make the things easier for each other, then there has to be some kind of a dialogue between these two and deliberation as well. But there has not been this dialogue, which was the duty of the central government. So this way, what one can understand is that even the very, very specific issue like the GST, here in which the things are very, very clear that there will be a council. But actually, if the central government does not go for a meeting of this kind of councils, then certainly the centralization of power is not for the benefit of the people, as Ambedkar would have argued that it's if the power is with the center, then center just cannot take it and should not be have a dialogue with the states. Then another issue which has come up very well is the vaccine veracity and the federal feuds. Take, for example, the case of vaccines. The single biggest difference between the first and the second wave was that there was now a vaccine in the second wave, except the Modi government actually dropped the ball, ordering too few vaccines and ordering them too late. Unaware of how big an error it was making, the central government even went on a kind of private overdrive, advertising how it had supplied vaccines to other countries, even as Indians themselves had vaccine rates well below the global average. As the second wave ravaged India and the center came under attack for this vaccination mess, it did something remarkable. It gave up. Actually, the central government gave up. On April 19, the Union government announced that it would not involve itself in vaccinating Indians below the age of 45. States would have to purchase the vaccines themselves from the international market. The only country to do this. The only part of India's powerful center would play in this critical task would be printing a photo of the Prime Minister on the vaccination certificate. While some states actually have already floated tenders and invited bids, it is clear that the chances of them being successful are dim, given that they are up against older orders and sovereign states. As a result, India's vaccination drive is slowing down even as the second wave progresses. Actually, during this second wave, what has happened is that the kind of role that the central government was supposed to play in managing this second wave, that has not been done by the central government. And you know that the judiciary has also intervened in this matter, and Supreme Court has given different kinds of order for this. And actually, this has been done. Why? Because the constitution gives a special mandate that whenever there is a kind of friction between the center and the states, then how the judiciary can intervene, and it can take even a suo motu, wherein it can on its own, it can take a decision. Then oxygen crisis also, you know very well that we never knew about this oxygen, that the oxygen is actually with the central government. And the central government is supposed to have the control of this. But during this time, we came to know that this is how it has been happening, and the center was allocating this oxygen to different states. And if the center, the oxygen was being distributed by the center, then you know that what kind of crisis we went through this during this period. And actually, it was not that there was no availability as such, but it was the inefficiency of the central government, that it could not handle the oxygen crisis so well. And the Supreme Court had to set up a force, a committee to or a task force to allocate oxygens to the states. And interestingly, you would be surprised that the center actually suggested that the Supreme Court should set up such a committee, such a task force, which the court did. So you see that the central government's role has been very, very detrimental in the crisis, and the crisis was actually fueled by the inefficient handling of the issue by the central government. And even as the state failed in its job when it came to providing oxygen to the states, it still used its power to make the situation worse. How? That it denied Punjab permission to import from Pakistan just across the border, because getting oxygen for Punjab was easier from the Pakistan than from inside the country itself. But it was not allowed because this was the power which was with the central government. A similar abdication was seen in keeping a watch out for the second wave, and like with vaccine procurement and interstate oxygen supply, the state center is ideally placed to plan, which in COVID involves watching out for the pandemic resolvement. Once alerted to those, the states would implement measures on the ground. However, the center failed. So this center-state relationship actually failed during these very, very crucial times, wherein actually the center should have been extraordinarily active to handle the situation. And if you look at the period, which is let's say the period between somewhere December to March, because it was only in the April or the end of the March that we came with the means we had to face the second wave. This period actually was not utilized by the central government to make effort for handling to handle the challenge of the second wave. And that's where Ambedkar actually argue that the situation has to be though managed by the center, but the guidelines, the way it has to be done, it has to be told by the central government. And not only told by the central government, but the resources, allocation of resources, because it is very clear that the constitution makes us knew very well that the states will not be having financial powers as such. Their financial powers will be very, very limited. And the crisis cannot be handled by the states themselves singularly. And that's why there was a need for the central government to intervene. And this intervention was not in the form of the way central government has been intervening in some of the issues during this pandemic. Like even if you look at the way the central government has handled the elections in, let's say, West Bengal and many other states. If the central government would have been sensitive enough, then the central government, instead of looking at the party politics or the benefits for the party, it should have considered for the people, for the states as such, wherein the elections could have been held within a single day. If the elections can be held in the country in a single day during those times, that is let's say 1951-52 election, wherein state assembly elections and the parliament elections were held together on a single day. Why not in these times wherein we have a lot of let's say infrastructure, a lot of mechanism to handle the situation, and for a state we have to spread the election for almost more than I think 2 months. So the central government's role actually has been very what can be said, a saddening role as such. And even after the elections, actually, there has been also the problems is still has been continuing, wherein the central government has been concerned about the issue of, let's say, West Bengal. On May 14, West Bengal Chief Minister wrote to the Union Finance Minister urging her to intervene the council in the light of massive expected shortfall in the taxes. A week earlier, Punjab had written a similar letter to the Union government. A failure to hold any constructive consultation with the states for so long in such critical times makes me wonder whether the center has usurped all the powers of states, putting the spirit of cooperative federalism. It was charged by Punjab Finance Minister Manpreet Singh Badal. It was after this that the Union Finance Ministry announced a GST Council meeting on May 28, marking what will in all probability be the start of another long union state struggle over pending GST dues. So what we see is that during all these times, we find that the response to the pandemic, so far as the government is concerned, has should have been a kind of big brother on the part of the state government, on the part of the central government. But actually, it has been working as a competitive, let's say, brother who is unnecessarily competing with the state governments. And the fault lines actually have been of different kinds, and the center has been abdicating its core responsibilities of plan state coordination. Leaving states to fend for themselves, it is more than happy to intrude into areas marked out for state or the local government. As you see through the kind of issues like labor laws, agriculture sector reforms, and also GST, and actually leaving states to fend for themselves, it is more than happy to intrude into the areas marked for the state or local government. The second wave has ensured that India's federal structure has been thrown into utter chaos. And this chaos has been, we have been witnessing this over a period of time. And I think, let me come to Ambedkar's understanding that how Ambedkar would have responded to something of this kind. When we look at Ambedkar's contribution, then what we find is that the comments of Ambedkar, final comments of Ambedkar, when there was a kind of criticism of Ambedkar in the Constituent Assembly, that what kind of federal structure we have got in, and we are basically going for centralized administration. Therein, he said it very, very clearly that some critics have said that the center is too strong. Others have said that it should be made more stronger. That means it was not so strong. The draft constitution has struck a balance. However, much you may deny powers to the center, it is difficult to prevent the center from becoming strong. Conditions in modern world are such that centralization of power is inevitable. One has only to consider the growth of federal government in the USA, which, notwithstanding the very limited powers given to it by the Constitution, has overgrown its former self and has overshadowed the eclipsed the state governments. Thus, this is due to the modern conditions. The same conditions are sure to operate on the government of India, and nothing that one can do will have help to prevent it from being strong. On the other hand, we must resist the tendency to make it stronger. See, he is very clear that though we are making the center strong, but it's not be made stronger. And it would be a folly to make it so strong that it may fall by its own weight. And if you look at this statement, that is last part, that it would be a folly to make it so strong that it may fall by its own weight. That means that Ambedkar was very, very clear that what we have to do is there has to be a balanced approach wherein center should be intervening in the state affairs and where state should be taking the advantage of being in the federal structure. So actually, if you look at the kind of powers have been distributed between the center and the state, there also we will find that the Ambedkar concern was that over a period of time, if you look at 1935 Act and his response was very, very clear that nothing doing, the center has to be very, very strong. But when we look at his Constituent Assembly debate in somewhere in 1950 or so, let's say 1949 or so, herein he is very, very clear and he is arguing that it would be very, very detrimental for the country as such if we make the center very, very strong. And that's what should be avoided in the pandemic times also. The kind of issues which have been raised during the pandemic time where the central government has taken over the states unaware of various issues, and though it might have taken some powers, but actually with the passage of time, it should again bestow these powers to the state governments, because without those powers, the central government will become so strong and it will be very, very detrimental to the country as such if the central government becomes very, very powerful. Thank you very much. I think I'll respond to the questions wherein there will be much more clarity on Ambedkar's idea. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So 51 hour పాటు సుమారుగా ప్రొఫెసర్ నరేంద్ర కుమార్ గారు కోవిడ్ మహమ్మారి సంక్షోభంలో డాక్టర్ బిఆర్ అంబేద్కర్ ప్రతిపాదించిన సమైక్యవాదం నుండి నేర్చుకోవాల్సినటువంటి పాఠాల మీద చాలా విషయాలు వారు మాట్లాడారు. ముఖ్యంగా అగ్రికల్చర్ బిల్స్ సంబంధించి లేబర్ కానీ జిఎస్టీ కానీ తర్వాత వ్యాక్సినేషన్ సప్లై గురించి కానీ లేదా గ్యాస్ కి సంబంధించినటువంటి అనేక విషయాలు ప్రొఫెసర్ నరేంద్ర కుమార్ గారు మాట్లాడారు. వారికి థ్యాంక్ యూ సార్. వన్స్ అగైన్ ఐ థ్యాంక్ యూ సార్. వారికి ప్రత్యేకమైనటువంటి ధన్యవాదాలు. ఇప్పుడు ప్రొఫెసర్ సంజీవ్ రెడ్డి గారు, సార్ ప్రొఫెసర్ సంజీవ్ రెడ్డి గారిని మాట్లాడాల్సిందిగా. ప్రొఫెసర్ సంజీవ్ రెడ్డి గారు.
సార్ నమస్తే. నమస్తే నమస్తే శ్రీనివాసు గారు.
నమస్కారం సార్. సార్ ప్లీజ్ మాట్లాడండి సార్ ప్లీజ్.
నరేన్, గుడ్ ఈవినింగ్ నరేన్.
Yeah, very good evening, Professor Sanjeev. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, we at the outset thank you. Now we always it was known that we have been calling Ambedkar as the father of the Constitution, but never really understood what his actual contribution was. Thanks for the inputs that you have given on the contribution of Ambedkar. From your lecture, it appears that there are two things that I could gather from your lecture. One is, at the bottom of the heart, Ambedkar was for the rights of the people. And this is reflected in your talk, wherein you have suggested that Ambedkar spoke of universal adult franchise much before anybody did. In 29, that's what you said. And he also spoke about the women's rights too, at the same this thing. These two point out that Ambedkar wanted the power to rest with the people. Okay. Second thing, on water policy and the development issues, that development was essential, but not at the cost of the people.
Yeah.
That you have pointed out that Ambedkar was not against development, but that he wanted that a reasonable compensation has to be paid to the people who will be the outstays of the dams or whatever. Whenever the development activity takes place, it's the common people who suffer most. And this shows that this idea of Ambedkar, that much before the Indian state came into being, and much before the development took place, this is a pointer to the concern Ambedkar had for the people. And regarding the provincial autonomy also, when he argued, I understand, that's what you said, that the state, the center has to intervene, and the center has to play a big brother role when the states go out of control in thinking about their own interest or greed for its own interest, as you have said. So this provincial autonomy doesn't mean that the states can usurp more of the resources. So here he argues for the center to play a big brother role to control the states. And you will also, with regard to the labor, the concern for the people is reflected in Ambedkar's attitude or Ambedkar's philosophy, where he brought in the reforms in labor sector. And he was also concerned that you have to pay more if you are asking for more work after beyond 8 hours. That shows that he valued human rights. He valued also the people there. And then in the same vein, the women labor force were also to be taken care. So in fact, it looks like there is a thread in Ambedkar's thought process, which is more inclined towards people, while the larger issues, and he also spoke about you said he also spoke about reforms in informal sector. So these point out there's a common thread in Ambedkar thought process about the centrality. The centrality is the people, while the contestation between the center and the states in sharing of the powers. Now, at one instant, he was for a very strong center. And later, during the drafting of the constitution, he said the center cannot be very strong. And at the end, again, if the center becomes too strong, I mean, it falls under its own weight. Yeah, that is a very eye-opener kind of a thing. It has been a very rewarding experience for me, Naren, to get in touch back with you, and thank you for that. But I have one question. You can answer all these questions together. I don't know. It is left to Professor Srinivasulu and Ramu sir and James to how you answer these questions. This is particularly to the a meeting that happened where Mamata refused to be part of the refused to meet the Prime Minister or kept him waiting in the recent West Bengal visit on the review meeting for that cyclone Yas. Now, I quote Dhankar, the governor of West Bengal. He said, I quote begins, non-participation by the chief minister and officials is not in sync with constitutionalism or rule of law. I unquote. This is what Dhankar had said. So in this context, how do you see center-state relations in future? Because if Mamata, in the euphoria that she has got that absolute majority in the polls, recent polls, can be defiant and say she's otherwise busy and not meet the head of the government of India, how do we see if all the chief ministers start doing this? This is going to be a problem to the country, and it is going to be a big challenge to the whole federal relations. So this is my question, Naren, and thank you, Naren, for this enlightening lecture. Thank you, Srinivas.
Sir, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Professor Sudhakar garu Kandakatla. Professor Sudhakar Kandakatla. Sir. Professor Sudhakar Kandakatla.
Thank you. I was unmuted. Thank you very much for giving opportunity. I was actually jumping from one side to other side because one other program was also identical program was going on. So thank you very much, Professor Narendra Kumar Sahab. It is a lecture of almost analysis of JNU level analysis. And as a student of political science long back to I could really enjoy this lecture. And the correlation of Dr. Ambedkar with that of a contemporary federal system, which is being criticized in recent times, that too particular in view of the changes that are occurring from electoral democracy to that of electoral autocracy. That's what people are uttering. This has become a buzzword. It is a fact. Electoral democracy is being transferred to that of electoral autocracy. So in this context, definitely the so-called cooperative federalism or any other kind of federalism as visualized by the framing fathers of the constitution, including that of Professor Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, has simply transferred to that competitive federalism. My friend Dr. Reddy was telling about the competitive, the concept of competitive federalism. That is what happened, a struggle between Mamata and that of a Prime Minister. So this is being seen everywhere and anywhere. And particularly, I couldn't actually listen the entire lecture, but so far as the pandemic and its impact on passing of various laws in undemocratic manner, and with that of a brutal majority, is that It's acts on Jammu Kashmir, acts on the CAA, and more particularly acts on the labor issues, the acts on the recent one, National Capital Delhi's enactment, giving a lot of powers to that of the lieutenant governor when there is an elected body there. So, but there are a lot of things that are, there are a lot of enactments that have been taken place during the pandemic, when people are struggling hard and dying hard. Still, then the government has, with its majority or other things, have tried to actually utilize the constitutional provisions of India, where so for example, so far as agriculture is concerned, agriculture basically is in the state list, but in order to invoke and enact any kind of brutal laws, the so-called draconian laws, they have invoked into and taken link provisions in the union list and the concurrent list and enacted laws. So this of course is something undigestible for a people who always feel that India is still a democracy. So thank you very much for giving this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Rama Rohini madam.
Madam, Vijayalakshmi, Professor Vijayalakshmi.
Rama Rohini madam.
Rama Rohini, madam. Madam, please.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you, Professor Narendra. It's a very interesting talk. And my question is, sir, to what extent has the majority mandate, that the same party at the center and the state, has helped in centralization of power, not only in the current times, even earlier, and especially in the last 1 year, what you have just now described during the COVID times? Is it to what extent is this having parties at the same center, and in the state, has actually helped in centralization? It is just not the current year. In early past also, we had a state and the center same parties. To what extent does these factors help in centralization of the power? That's my question.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, madam. Thank you, madam. Professor Vijayalakshmi, madam. Professor Vijayalakshmi, madam. Madam. Professor Vijayalakshmi, madam. Sir. Unmute చేశారా సార్ మేడం ని? ఏ నరసింహారెడ్డి గారు? సార్ ఏ నరసింహారెడ్డి గారు? అంజన్ రావు గారు? డాక్టర్ అంజన్ రావు? అంజన్ రావు గారు? డాక్టర్ అంజన్ రావు, డాక్టర్ ఏ నరసింహారెడ్డి గారు?
Sir.
Yeah.
Sir Naren sir, I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, is India a failed state as reported by India Today in its cover page, or is it an institutional breakdown? Is
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you enlighten?
You need to unmute. You are
Yeah.
muted. Yeah.
Yeah. Sir, Vishnu sir.
Professor Vishnu, sir. Professor Vishnu. No, sir. Sir, relevant, sir.
He's there. He's there.
Vishnu Charan Chaudhary.
Yes.
Yeah.
No. Okay.
Manoj Reddy.
I think they are not able to unmute.
Sir, Vishnu sir.
No. సార్ మీట్లో ఉన్నారు సార్ ఇంకా.
Can we do one thing that I respond to the questions?
ఓకే సార్,
already
ప్లీజ్ సార్,
we
ప్లీజ్.
have,
please.
and then we can wait for the, yeah, is that
యా
okay?
ప్లీజ్. యా ఓకే సార్, ప్లీజ్.
Yeah. Fine. Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Sanjeev Reddy, for your comments. And the question that you have asked is the kind of non-participation of Mamata Banerjee when there was a meeting of the Prime Minister. See, if you look at constitutionally, there is actually no clarity about this so far as constitution is concerned. But there is something known as the constitutional morality. And if those who are at the helm of affairs, they abide by the constitutional morality, and we know very well that what is constitutional morality. Constitutional morality is something wherein constitution might be silent, but looking at the way constitution has talked about and the way it has envisaged the relationship between different organs and between different, let's say, stakeholders of the state and central governments, then one would certainly find that Mamata Banerjee or any chief minister for that matter, if has been invited by the Prime Minister, then they are supposed to actually come for such meetings. That is one thing very, very clear. And if that is not possible, it is not that for the first time it has happened. Many other times it has happened that the person, the chief minister, may not be in a position to come, but he or she has to depute someone else, that so that there is a kind of mandatory requirement which is filled, that the chief minister has been represented by someone else. So there is something of this kind, which I don't know in this case whether that happened or not. But what if Mamata Banerjee was not willing to come, then she should have sent someone to represent herself. That is one. Second is that if all the chief ministers and majority of the chief ministers start doing this practice, then it will be very, very difficult for the country as such. And it will lead to the kind of anarchy we are looking in for last maybe 4-5 years or so. And actually the responsibility not to bring such a situation, if you look at the constitution, actually, then certainly the Prime Minister is supposed to play a big brother's role. And therein one has to see that whether he is a representative of the party, he works more as a representative of the party, more as the. So this is, I think, this difference any leader, any person should have, and the major thing is the constitutional morality that should prevail. Dr. Sudhakar's question is regarding that the electoral democracy has turned into the electoral autocracy. Actually, what we are witnessing over last few years, though this has happened during, let's say, the changes which were taking place in 1960s, late 1960s and early 1970s and later as well, wherein the party in power in the center and the party in power at the in the states were different, and there were different kinds of hiccups which were taking place during those times. But those times were little different times, because during those times we were still in the in the let's say historical emotions of the partition as well as the colonialism. So all majority of the people were behaving in a relatively logical and rational manner. But now what we see is that the electoral autocracy is being, we can look at the Mamata Banerjee's response to not coming for the meeting of Prime Minister is a kind of electoral autocracy. But this electoral autocracy, whether it is being shown by the Prime Minister himself also, that also has to be looked into. And whether it is coming from there and then percolating down to the chief ministers, that actually needs to be looked at. Then second aspect is the cooperative federalism and competitive federalism. Actually, the constitution envisaged for the cooperative federalism, but there have been times that we witnessed the competitive federalism. But the kind of competitive federalism we are witnessing now is of a different nature. And one can say it is of a, let's say, a little vulgar nature, wherein both the center and the states are behaving in a very, very derogatory, in some way, sense derogatory way. And this competitive federalism might be detrimental to the life of the nation itself. That's what I would like to argue. And that's what Ambedkar actually, the words that finally I told you, that Ambedkar was also very, very apprehensive, wherein the center becomes too strong and the competitive, actually, the competitive federalism might also be the kind of a strong center which is reflected over a period of time. So whether it is the strong center which is leading to the competitive federalism, that also needs to be looked at. Why there is no cooperative federalism, whether the contribution is more of the center or of the states themselves. So this also has to be looked into, and this can be looked into case by case. Then a brutal majority and LG powers, obviously, see, we have been witnessing that the central government has been very, very specific to handle some of the state governments in a different manner, and particularly the opposition governments, and those opposition governments which whose chief ministers have been voicing their concerns, have been let's say vocal about the concerns of their own states. So for those states, the central government's response has been different, and to those states where they have their own chief ministers, and you know very well that whether it was during the Indira Gandhi's period and whether now, during Indira Gandhi's period also, the chief ministers were not actually voicing their concerns. They were not able to speak. But the same we are seeing during this period, wherein the central government is becoming very, very powerful, and the state chief ministers, they are just keeping mum, and those who are airing their concerns, they are looked at as if they are the enemies. So there has to be a kind of understanding between both, that is center and the state, that if there are genuine concerns of the states, then those the states are not, sorry, if the states are not responding or let's say abiding by the directions given by the central government, there also it has to be looked at that how it is happening and why that is happening. Then there is Professor Amar Rohini talked about that to what extent central state centralization of power actually has been taking place, and this factor of centralization of power is the centralization of power actually was taking place even in the earlier times, and but the center state relations actually were not being impacted the way those have impacted when there has been a major centralization of power. And the example I have already given is that of Indira Gandhi, and now we are looking at the centralization of power wherein the
Sir, please on your video, sir, please.
okay, there is some issue.
Yeah, okay, sir. Please.
Is it fine? Okay, there was some problem.
Please.
Yeah. So actually, the center state relations, if they are not managed the way Constitution has envisaged, and the Constitution does not tell that these are the only ways to handle the situation. If you one recalls Ambedkar's understanding of the Constitution itself, he said in the final words that a constitution, howsoever good, might prove to be a bad constitution if those who are implementing it are a bad lot. And a constitution which is relatively a bad constitution might prove to be a good constitution if those who are at the helm of affairs, they are the good lot. So it is finally on the individual. You know very well that the same office behaves differently when a particular individual is there, and the same office behaves differently when another individual occupies that particular position. So it is actually basically this finally actually boils down to the individual and the kind of ideology, the kind of personality a person is. Then our friend has asked that whether India is a failed state or there is just an institutional breakdown as of now. People have been talking about this, that India is a failed state. Initially, the Western political scientists, social scientists, and even the commoners were very, very apprehensive that whether the democracy in India will survive. But we survived. The democracy survived in this country, though it has experienced different kinds of hiccups over a period of time. But I would not say that India is still a failed state. Why? Because one can say that India could be a failed state in specific circumstances to deal with specific issues. There one can say that in this particular front or on this particular front, India is a failed state. But if you look at some other issue, then one would find that India is certainly not a failed state. But there can be institutional breakdowns. But those institutional breakdowns are also specific. Those institutional breakdowns are also individual, and it relates to individual institutions. If you look at, let's say, the Supreme Court or the High Courts behaving 1 year back, and the High Courts and Supreme Court behaving now, you would see a different picture. Then one actually might feel that sometimes there is a breakdown, but if you look at in a comprehensive manner, then I would say that India is still not a failed state, and there might be some institutional breakdowns in some institutions, but not in all the institutions. Like one can say that the presidents have also behaved differently to different situations. If you recall, Dr. K.R. Narayanan, who was the president during Vajpayee's time, he was the one who aired his known pleasure that why there should be the review of the constitution. And you know very well that the Constitutional Review Committee was established by Vajpayee government. But when President K.R. Narayanan, he responded, and he indirectly said that we need to see whether the constitution has failed or we have failed the constitution. And in response to that, because Vajpayee was a seasoned politician, he was relatively a statesman, not just a politician. So he realized this, and he at that point of time he abandoned the review of the constitution process itself. So you see that different individuals, different institutions might actually show that we exist, and sometimes we might feel that these institutions don't exist. So, but in totality, I would say that India still is not a failed state as such, except few institutional breakdowns.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Professor Vishnu. Professor Vishnu is on the line.
Okay. Sir, Professor Vishnu, sir. Vishnu Chaudhary. Sir.
Praveen, you go ahead.
Yeah, good evening to everyone. Good evening to Ramana for organizing once again a very important topic with regard to the pandemic situation and the federal spirit in this regard. Today our speaker from Professor Narendra Kumarji has given a very good lecture on this topic. And I have a few things to discuss over here. We have been facing a tragic kind of pandemic situation from past 1.5 years. When it comes to the medical supply to the public, medicines especially, and the treatment kind of thing. When it comes to central government, it want to handle the things on its own by keeping all the states in their control. They want to show that they are in a position to control everything in spite of not taking any help from the state governments. But it was not happened at any stage. Because of that situation, we were in a position where we could not handle this pandemic situation. By the way, we have seen recently, there are more lakhs of people have died, but the government has never showed this on records. Unfortunately, even in our state and country, a lot of people are facing this problem, but still we could not find a proper solution to it. We have come with a solution in the name of vaccination, but when it comes to the vaccination, India want to control vaccination again by central government. So by the name of Make in India, we have given approval to only one vaccine, and another vaccine is from with the cooperation with other country. So when it comes to this Indian vaccine, still we could not pass it over to states and small cities and towns. Now, if you see, again, central government has given approval to the private players where they can come out and give the vaccination. If we clearly observe this from January till date, actually, central government has kept everything in their control, right from the medicines, right from the treatment, right from everything. When it's given to the private players, now from past 1 week, we are able to see lakhs of vaccination available at the private centers. So I don't know how it is been happening. I mean, how it happens when central government controls everything. there is no vaccination to the states, and it has clearly shown the difference between the states and the states which are ruling with their BJP government and the states which are ruling with other local parties or other Congress parties. So we have never got a proper medicines, like if though they were working properly or not, we are not sure, but we did not receive any medicine. Right from example, now we have seen black fungus medicine. When it comes to Gujarat, there are more than 10,000 vials have been given to Gujarat, but when it comes to Telangana or Andhra Pradesh, not more than 2,000 doses have been given, in the month of May. So if you see that clear difference in every phase and everywhere, if we talk about Ambedkar and Constitution, it's a big thing for me to incorporate Ambedkar Constitution to this BJP government, because there is no federalism. I think federalism is there, but only on paper. There is no federal spirit as well. Center want to control everything. Central government has clearly failed. I can say I think that this is more than 10 debates have been conducted by Ramana on this particular issue. So every time the issue is becoming more and more. We haven't seen any progress. We haven't seen any decline in this issue. So hope so, because of federalism or because of anything, or because of Ambedkar Constitution, we might get a good days in future, not by this government or by any other government. So hoping so. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you to Ramana and President and all the Telangana Janavedika members, especially from Hyderabad and Warangal and across all the parts of Telangana and Andhra Pradesh and India. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Praveen sir. Thank
Sir,
you.
Vishnu sir. Vishnu sir, please unmute yourself, sir.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, you are audible, sir.
Yes. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, sir. Good evening.
I have been carefully listening to the presentation, rather very articulate presentation by Professor Narendra Kumar. But I raised two questions regarding the management of the migrant laborers, both by the center and the state government. Second thing, my point was states need more financial allocation because of the peculiar situation prevailing now, because they have dearth of resources. They cannot collect their own money by way of petrol or by way of other duties that they collect. So they are totally depending on the central funding. Moreover, they have to pay the salary and the pensionary commitment, and also to augment their health infrastructure, etc. That is second. Third point that I wanted to raise is regarding West Bengal issue. Now opinion is divided. Many senior bureaucrats, they have come to the position that nothing wrong has been done by Alpan Bandyopadhyay. Others say that it is a serious breach of code of conduct by a civil servant. So what is the justification that Mr. Bandyopadhyay gives? The justification is that they came, they waited in the lounge of the in a waiting room to meet the Prime Minister. Then they met the Prime Minister, gave some documents detailing the requirement for the relief, rehabilitation, restoration for Yas. Then the Chief Minister asked for permission of the Prime Minister to leave the place so that they can visit the affected areas due to Yas cyclone. Then secondly, I find in this particular case, there is more a class of ego than there of any rule, regulation, norms, ethics, morality, principles governing central-state relationship. It is a question of ego between the Prime Minister and the Chief Minister. So the Chief Secretary became a scapegoat, whether to go by whatever the Chief Minister wants him to do, or he has to attend as per protocol, as per the Blue Book, to the Prime Minister's visit to West Bengal to review the situation after the cyclone. So we have seen from our practice or from our experience that during these several decades, on all these questions, different commissions have given specific, clear-cut recommendations to follow. But all these recommendations have been followed more in its violation, irrespective of the party in power at the center. Whether it was the Congress dispensation or the non-Congress governments, they never followed the Sarkaria Commission or any Punchi Commission report. There are also code of conduct being prescribed for the chief ministers and the governors, and how to make our federal system more functional, but nobody is prepared to go for those things. It is a question of power. It is a question of being authoritarian in their behavior, now playing a very vital role in the functioning of our central relationship, spoiling our whole system for which we have made this central relations or this parliamentary federal structure in our country. These are my observations. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, we have 6 minutes more time. Adhyaksha?
Sir.
We have 6 minutes more time. If you want
Okay.
if you want Narendra sir to sum up, or you want any questions to be asked, please.
No, sir. Please, Sir, Narendra Kumar, sir. Please, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Do you want me to respond? Actually, these are just the observations.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. Manoj.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am respond here.
Good evening, Anna.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good evening, all the respected members. And firstly, my respects to my Guruji, Purushottam Rao Garu. And thank you, Sanjeev Anna, for introducing Narendra ji for our Vedika. As Sanjeev Anna is also became strong pillar of Ramanna's Vedika. Really happy to hear that. And we are going towards a chaos situation, really running through a pandemic. Ambedkar ji gone through plague, and he would have gone through cholera and some sort of diseases, but he wouldn't face this. The world kept under lockdown for such a period, really. If Ambedkar ji was alive, he would have what he would have do in this political situation, we can't understand, because going to Honorable Prime Minister Modi ji, when the first wave was occurred, he told to lamp the diya and he told to clap. He took serious at that time the pandemic situation he took very seriously, and he gave warning to the people, and he also of course he did it, but coming to the second wave, he will be having a set of doctors over there. He will be having the intelligence report for every situation there. But how such a intelligent, mighty Modi ji couldn't tackle this second wave, I couldn't understand. And what's my question to you, sir, is Prime Minister ji coming to this center-state relations? You told about Mrs. Gandhi ji. Mrs. Gandhi, of course, she too have this sort of problem. She faced this sort of problem when she was Prime Minister, but she acted very wisely and she sorted out the problem at that time. But coming to the present situation, our Modi ji is going through some different way, and he want to take the whole situation under his control. And tomorrow, what's going to happen? Really, my question is, sir, is Prime Minister ji is under the suppression of the other leaders of the other countries' leaders or something like that? Because if the center-state relations are strong, then naturally the international relations will be stronger, sir. What's happening there, really being such a mighty Modi ji is facing such a problem, and he couldn't face such a massive second wave, and we lost many lives over India. Really, it's very painful, sir. I want to know what's happening really there, sir. As an analyst, you please make us known. Thank you so much, sir. And thank you, Ramana, for giving me the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Student response.
Sir.
Yeah, one thing is very clear that first wave, our Prime Minister was very, very confident in handling the situation, though it could not be handled that time also because the way things happened. But these were extraordinary times and extraordinary situation was there because actually Professor Vishnu also talked about the migration of labor, and some of these issues happened actually, which was in response to the first lockdown. But when it comes to the period between the first lockdown and the second lockdown, actually, our Manoj Reddy, we are also actually surprised that why this situation happened, wherein the Prime Minister, who has been very, very vocal and who has been saying that I'll be handling any kind of situation very well, how come he could not handle this situation, and what kind of let's say leverage it gave to the situation to worsen. That actually is little difficult to understand, that's for sure. But what I think is the understanding is that actually sometimes people, some common people might also think that way, that obviously the Prime Minister himself cannot handle everything, and this Prime Minister has been trying to handle each and everything, wherein even for the, let's say, whether the 12th class examination should be cancelled or not, here also the Prime Minister is the one who is coming forward. But I really don't know why the Prime Minister should be coming forward for such a small thing, wherein the 12th class examination have to be cancelled or postponed, whatever. For such a small thing, the Vice Prime Minister should be bothering. And actually, see, finally, it will one should see that such a Prime Minister, if he is a visionary one, then he should have envisioned that this is the kind of situation, and not only others, his own actually advisors had already warned him that there would be a second wave, and if there would be a second wave, the Prime Minister should have been very, very cautious to handle the second wave. And now the people have, his own advisors have talked about even the third wave. That whether I really don't understand, and I really don't see that for the third wave also, we as a nation are preparing ourselves. And there is something which is visible, which might show that yes, the Prime Minister and his team are working day and night to handle the third wave, because nothing comes out that these are the measures which are being taken. And on the contrary, a smaller chief minister like Arvind Kejriwal, he is saying that we are trying to form a committee, which task force, which will be looking into the issues of the children if the comes. So if this is the kind of situation we are in, then certainly there has to be much more vocal and much more, let's say, lines and plan for the third wave. And if that is not seen, then we need to see that why and what is happening, that actually at this juncture, I think I will not be able to tell you something, but maybe in the later period, we might be able to understand that why this thing happened. Thank you very much.
భాస్కర్, నువ్వు మాట్లాడతావా? లైన్ వచ్చిన ఓకే ఓకే సార్.
Sir.
Already we are 2 minutes ahead, behind schedule.
ఓకే.
Oh,
సో ఎనీవే కంక్లూడ్ చేస్తున్నా.
Yeah.
ప్లీజ్. సో తెలంగాణ జనవేదిక జూమ్ ఆన్లైన్ మీటింగ్ కు ఇచ్చేసినటువంటి కీలకోపన్యాసకులు ప్రొఫెసర్ నరేంద్ర కుమార్ గారికి మా తెలంగాణ జనవేదిక తరపున ప్రత్యేకమైనటువంటి ధన్యవాదాలు సార్. అదేవిధంగా ప్రొఫెసర్ సంజీవ్ రెడ్డి గారికి, ప్రొఫెసర్ సుధాకర్ గారికి, ప్రొఫెసర్ విజయలక్ష్మి మేడం గారికి, డాక్టర్ మధుసూదన్ రెడ్డి గారు మరియు ప్రవీణ్ సాగర్ గారు, డాక్టర్ రామా రోహిణి గారు, ప్రొఫెసర్ విష్ణు శరణ్ చౌదరి గారు అండ్ విజయలక్ష్మి మేడం గారు, ప్రవీణ్ సాగర్ గారు, మనోజ్ రెడ్డి, ఉమామేశ్వర్ రెడ్డి, జేమ్స్ ప్రశాంత్ అండ్ నరసింహారెడ్డి, అంజన్ కుమార్ గారు, ఇతర మిత్రులు ఇంకా చాలా పెద్ద మంది, సుమారుగా ఇవాళ 12 మంది ప్రొఫెసర్లు ఏమో జాయిన్ అయ్యారు. నాకు తెలిసి డిఫరెంట్ ఫీల్డ్లకు సంబంధించినటువంటి పెద్దవాళ్ళే ఇవాళ ఈ సెషన్ లో 12 నుండి 15 మంది ప్రొఫెసర్లు నిష్ణాతులైనటువంటి వాళ్ళు జాయిన్ అయ్యారు. వాళ్ళందరికీ తెలంగాణ జనవేదిక తరఫున పేరు పేరున ధన్యవాదాలు తెలియజేసుకుంటూ ఈనాటి ఈ కార్యక్రమం ముగిస్తున్నాం. వచ్చే ఆదివారం మరొక అంశంతో కలుసుకుంటామని అందరికీ నమస్కారాలు తెలియజేసుకుంటూ సెలవు తీసుకుంటాను. అందరికీ థ్యాంక్స్ వన్స్ అగైన్. థ్యాంక్ యూ సార్. థ్యాంక్ యూ వెరీ మచ్.
Good night, sir, Professor. Sir.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we are
Yeah,
honored
good
by
night.
your talk today. It is a
Same
wonderful
here,
talk.
same
Yeah,
here.
it's a wonderful talk, and it's
Thank you.
really enlightening. Like Professor Sanjay Reddy rightly said, it is really an enlightening session. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Nice day.
Thank you, Professor Narendra Kumar.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
గుడ్ నైట్.
Thank you, all of you. Good night,
Thanks,
sir.
everyone.
Yeah, we'll meet
Good
next
night.
Sunday. Thank you.
No, no, sir, no.
Namaste.